Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to say welcome, and secondly, thank you for giving up the time and obviously the brain power that you've had to deal with the questions in advance. It'll be very useful to us. Members may be aware that the committee's inquiry was discussed on... Oh, sorry, no, that's not what I haven't got now. Yes, that's right. First of all, I have to ask if any member has got, members of the committee, have interest to declare in relation to this meeting. I'll also point out that Lord Freeman, who's a member of this committee, has decided to absent himself anything because of his involvement with Talis. Yes, I was looking at Talis. And Lord Clinton Davis, you've got an interest to declare?
Only on the second one.
Oh, I see. And Lord Brooke?
Not on this one.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Our specialist advisor knows of two of today's witnesses, Keith Hayward and Gary Clayton. Neither of them are here, actually, at the moment. It's the next... Oh, they're at the back, waiting to be grilled. Thank you. Yes.
And he knows too.
Oh, and you also knows, I believe, Dr. Sue Wolfe. Okay.
And Raymond.
Oh, and Rayman. Thank you. Yes, briefing on the hoof. Now, this is the formal evidence-taking session of the committee, and a full shorthand note will be taken. This will be put on the public record in printed form and on the parliamentary website. You will be sent a copy of the transcript and you'll be able to revise it in terms of any minor errors. The session is on the record. It is being webcast live and will be subsequently accessible via parliamentary, well, we've had that already, parliamentary website. And you're welcome to submit supplementary, this is very important, welcome to submit supplementary written evidence after the session, and we'll welcome that. Witnesses and members are reminded to speak up so that everyone will be able to hear you properly. The acoustic is reasonably good, but sometimes people mumble, and sometimes I do too. No, don't need that. Would you like to make a brief opening remarks? And we go from the left.
Nothing from me.
No?
No.
No? Oh, no, Miss Mann. Now, can you actually, for the record, say who you are? That's what I should have asked.
Dr. Sue Wolfe. I'm project manager with a company called Callanens Associates Limited and its sister company Ursula Agriculture. And I'm also here representing the Trade Association for Small UAS, RPAS UK, and two other user groups from the Remote Sensing and Photogrammetry Society and the National Centre for Precision Agriculture at Harper Adams University.
Thank you. Mr. Watson.
My name is Neil Watson. I'm the Civil RPAS campaign lead for Talis UK, based at Crawley, really looking at the civil and commercial viability of RPAS operations, primarily beyond line of sight, so really looking at the larger, above 150 kilogram class of UAV in the civil domain. Right, and Mr. Mann.
My name is Ray Mann. I'm the owner and managing director of West Wales Airport. West Wales Airport established the National Aeronautical Centre along with Newquay Airport in Cornwall. We've been flying unmanned systems there since 2004, so we're the most established centre anywhere in Europe at the moment for flying unmanned systems, particularly beyond visual line of sight.
Thank you very much. Just before I ask the question, can I just clarify with Dr. Wolfe? You said that you represent the small RPAS. Now, small and big. Big is over 150 kilograms?
That's right, yes.
And so everything under 150 is you?
Yes, right. But more at the smaller end from there, generally 20 kilograms. And
I see. So there isn't much between 20 and 150? I see, that's interesting, thank you. Right, well, you've got a copy of the questions, and I'm asking the first one. Has the European Commission's communication on the civil use of RPAS identified the main issues around the use of RPAS in Europe? Safety authorizations, privacy and data protection, security of control, liability and insurance, and EU-funded research and development. Now, who would like to start? Right, Mr. Mann.
A simple question to that is no. particularly when we look at safety authorization and privacy and data protection. I think everybody's aware of the roadmap that's been produced by Europe. And it covers all eventualities, but it doesn't really address what would be safety authorization, because it struggles to address what type of technology we are likely to use to ensure that that safety is achieved. So there are a lot of shortfalls in their current proposals.
Yes, I see. And would you agree with that, Mr. Watson?
Yeah, it's a mixed bag, really. I think it's a very good definition of the problem space. I think it complements the airspace integration roadmap, which was actually produced by the European Commission back in 2012. So it's a kind of an update, sort of executive summary of the position we're in. But as Ray says, it raises an awful lot more questions than answers. I think that it recognises that there's an awful lot of stakeholders involved in it, and I think it comes down to really a proportionate course of action in terms of the evolving regulatory process. We talk about equivalence in terms of safety with manned aviation. We talk about transparency in terms of air traffic management. Yeah. And I think the third tenet, which is equally important, that often doesn't come across, is fairness. It has to be proportionate. You're not looking for over-equivalent or an over-exerted level of safety. So I think it's good. It just needs some caveats, I think, in some of the areas that it actually addresses.
Can I just ask you to expand a bit further about fairness? Because are you suggesting that the larger aircraft, manned aircraft, are dealt with
yes.
fair?
Yes, I think it's not a one size fits all, to coin a phrase. As Sue was saying, that the 20 kilogram problem space is somewhat different to the larger, more strategic assets that we're actually looking at. I think we just need to be careful that regulation is proportionate and is directed, at the right level to the right community.
Right, Dr. Wolfe.
I would agree with Neil. I would say, though, that there is likely to be a change in the way regulation goes forward, in terms of not on the basis of a size limit, but on the basis of risk and operation. Whilst in principle that's fine, and it does actually help to define the level of risk. Within the small UAS community, there has been a long tradition of working at a national level with the Civil Aviation Authority. And there's a great rapport there, and I think because of that, the UK, as it stands at the moment, does have some advantage compared with other countries because of that great working relationship. So I think the concern of the small UAS community is where that regulation is going to be in the future. Is there still going to be that relationship at a national level? And we would certainly want that to happen.
Of course, there's also the other dimension, which is the concern of the general public and privacy and all the rest of it coming to that too. Thank you. That's a very, very good answer. Now, who's the next one? Lord Cotter.
Yes, despite significant RPAS commercial activity in the UK, according to the CAA, operations are still subject to a number of restrictions. What would you say are the key technologies that will allow relaxation of these constraints? And are the same technologies required for both small and larger RPAS, would you say?
The constraints are specific at the moment, in that there are limitations to the use of small systems under 20 kilos in terms of the area in which you would operate. These are systems that, although they're aircraft and recognized as aircraft, they can do things that aircraft really couldn't ever do previously. They can come much closer, they can fly much lower, they can really get to areas to much more definition. But of course that has problems, a lot of problems for security, privacy, and data protection. So those are the three issues for very small ones. So we've invented, what has been invented is something that is capable in a different way to how we know aviation. When we go to larger systems, currently the regulation stipulates that we have to fly them, if we're flying them beyond visual line of sight, to fly them within a segregated airspace, so it's free from other air users, from a safety point of view. These are larger systems, more recognizable as aircraft and capable to the similar levels, and have the restrictions as aircraft would have in terms of being able to get close to things. So the constraints really are down to technology. How can we ensure that we have the equivalent command and control when a pilot is in a ground control station as he would be if he was in the cockpit of an airplane? That is the main restriction. Now, we hear a lot about sense and avoid systems. Well, we use sense and avoid systems today because, of course, a lot of aircraft fly in clouds, so they can't really use the Mark 1 eyeball. So they have to use other systems. They have to use radar and other mechanisms on board that enable them to understand where they are and how they are relating to other aircraft. The command and control link is the difference between the pilot on the ground and the pilot in the cockpit. And it's that technology and that network of communications capability that we in this country could, in actual fact, establish on our own. We could lay down a complete network of capability and run unmanned systems just in this country, because we're the right size of country to do that with. If you had a very large country, it would be very difficult to put a network in that would give you that command and control that you need. So therefore, a little bit like your mobile phone, when you move to one location, you pick up a signal. You move to another location, you pick up a signal. What we need with unmanned systems is a technology that ensures that command and control is always linked to the aircraft. So no matter what happens under any circumstances, the control can be taken from the ground.
That's a very interesting concept. Have you sort of pursued the thought of us being independent and doing it, in view of the fact that we're a European Union Select Committee, and we're just doing scrutiny from the point of view of regulation, etc., which is likely to come from, and has come from, the European Union? I mean, I don't think that's feasible, is it?
Well, currently, it's not 2016, so therefore Europe hasn't taken everything away from us. In 2016, we lose the control of under 150 kilos. However, if we look closely at the capability of the CAA, they can accredit and certificate things that are even larger than that within our own airspace. So we do have some autonomy. And really the secret is this, and I read somewhere the other day, and I think maybe something came out of this hearing, these hearings, is that the value of the industry for systems that can fly beyond visual line of sight is £100 billion a year. So when you consider that as a goal, if you like, for UK PLC, I am sorely tempted to look to our own aerospace industry and to our own capabilities in this country, both regulatory and technically, to be able to achieve this and to export this to the rest of the world. So the opportunity is there.
Interesting point. Yes. Lord Clinton Davis. Sorry, does anybody round there? Yes, you wanted to.
On this,
yes.
I mean, we have a European Union country which is extraordinarily close to us, not France, but the Republic of Ireland. Are you saying that you believe we could run a command and control system in the UK which would in fact prevent a small RPAS going into Ireland?
Yes. Command and control is not just the command and control for the systems themselves, to be able to fly them and operate them, but is to be able to control them. Now, one of the things that we need with security, and we have this currently with manned aircraft, we know what they are, we know where they are, and we know who's operating them.
Yes, but aren't we talking about systems, though, now, the smaller recreational ones, where people will not know who the controller is and what their intentions are? Can you argue the case that they could be controlled, those individuals?
Well, if you wanted to go to Ireland with a very small, under 20 kilos RPAS, I don't think you'd reach it It's simply not large enough.
Yeah, but you could
With
actually
technology.
export.
Do you think in 5 years' time it won't be able to do it?
Well, it could possibly be, but in principle at the moment it doesn't really have the endurance to be able to make those distances. And this is where under 20 kilos tends to operate simply in a local area within line of sight, and it's a specific case.
A bit like mobile phones, though, when they were brick size. And
Indeed.
That's right. But
Now
when,
they're so small we lose them. Yes, okay.
About this. Presumably you have meetings with the European representative of the European Union. Who is that, and how often do the meetings take place?
we at the West Wales Airport and the NEC tend not to engage ourselves too much at the moment with work that's being carried out by Europe, basically because we are a facility for the development of systems and not operators of systems themselves. I'm not sure whether, Neil, perhaps you could answer that.
Yeah, in terms of European engagement, I guess there are a couple of imperatives and large programs that are looking at the integration of RPAS. So CESAR is a good example. So from an air traffic management perspective, they're looking at harmonising a set of rules that will enable RPAS to be accommodated within the next generation of the ATM infrastructure. Because, as you know, in terms of capacity, efficiency, safety, and environmental footprint, there are a set of objectives that Europe are actually aspiring to meet. The really good thing about a programme such as CESAR is that they have woken up to the presence and the importance of RPAS as a viable airspace user. So it's being accommodated in the next phase of CESAR, which is called Horizon 2020, which will run obviously for the next 5 years. And so they are looking at it, in terms of how does an air traffic controller deal with an RPAS? What are its fundamental differences in terms of its operating characteristics? And there are some good things that predictability is a key positive, if you like, for RPAS compared to manned aviation. If something goes wrong, there's a set of pre-programmed responses that an RPAS will take. Now, air traffic controllers like predictability. So CESAR is one example of a European. The other is from the regulatory perspective. Obviously, is the work that we're doing with the European regulator, EASA, through industry participation in the EUROCAE working groups. EUROCAE is the organisation responsible for developing standards and procedures that feed up into EASA. And they are now planning on working with JARUS, who I know there's been a lot of discussion about JARUS in preceding hearings, but they're obviously a regulatory body, and I think now that EASA have, the new constructs of EASA will actually engender more harmonisation.
We'll be coming to that question.
Jumping the gun.
Right. Now, any more questions from members on that one? No, right, thank you. Lord Clinton Davis.
Can I ask a question about the arrangements, the regulatory arrangements between the European Aviation Safety Agency and the Joint Authorities for Rulemaking on unmanned systems? Do you think there's a sufficient delineation of responsibility as far as the two are concerned? And how would you propose any development of regulations as far as the practice is concerned?
I do wonder whether EASA has got more interest in how things work and JARUS has more interest in how it should be regulated. I think the problem with EASA is that it's having difficulty second-guessing the technology that is possibly going to be applied in order for RPAS to operate as safe as a manned system. And I think maybe one of the reasons why JARUS has not been successful in coming forward with a timetable for rulemaking, because it's a long way behind the curve, because EASA hasn't been able to establish the manner in which we would do it. So I don't see that it would be possible to build an industry on the back of regulation you build an industry and usually the regulation comes in behind it, which is really why we're talking now quite seriously about, of course, the small systems, the under 20 kilos, where there is a proliferation of them, and they do have to be addressed sooner rather than later now.
Right.
Yes. Point on the small US is actually very pertinent because that industry exists now. It is commercial, and the point of your question regarding the relationship with the regulators, there has been a lot of work between industry from the small US perspective and the national regulators, the Civil Aviation Authority. And as I think I mentioned earlier on, that's helped drive the industry very, very strongly. I would agree with Ray Mann in terms of there being two elements to there's the development of the regulation itself and the implementation process. And they really do need to go hand in hand because they actually impact how the industry works. So, yes, I think at the small scale there is a lot of joint working with the regulator at a national level. That's not happened as yet at a European level because we're not really at that stage, and that comes back to the concern of the small US community about what will happen there with those relationships and how that regulatory work is ongoing. And I would also say it's not necessarily just the industry involvement. I don't know if there is a question later about working with HEIs and academia. There's a lot of activity now in academia, both in driving UAS and the technology itself, but also in using UAS as a tool. So there could be quite a significant interest from an academic perspective about engaging on the regulation as well.
Lord Haskell, you wanted to ask a question.
What is happening then at the present time? Are people just ignoring any possible regulations? Are they just doing whatever they want to do? Or are they just not flying?
No, absolutely not at all. They basically, small US operators gain an exemption where they need to from the Civil Aviation Authority via a process which is laid down. Through a document called CAP 722, there are certain mechanisms whereby small UAS are allowed to operate in the UK under certain restrictions, within line of sight, for example, and within certain height restrictions. So that's the basis upon which the whole industry in the UK with small UAS has actually evolved. So the industry as it stands is really already quite vibrant, even within those restrictions. If we could start to drive those restrictions just a little bit further, then the industry begins to open up more and more. So because of that process, we do have an industry where in many other countries that doesn't yet exist.
I see. Thank you very much. Lady Hooper.
Thank you. My question's about the European Union's research programme. And you've already referred to CESAR, and this is an example, I understand. Do you feel that these will be adequate and sufficient to provide the necessary infrastructures for the future?
It's a partial solution. I think because CESAR is absolutely focused on air traffic management, so by implication you're looking at RPAS operations in controlled airspace, i.e. airspace where you have air traffic management oversight. What it's not looking is the type of airspace that the small community, the small RPAS community are likely to want to operate in, so the line of sight type of operations. Mm-hmm. So for interests of myself, it's a huge interest because I think in terms of the baby steps that we need to take to actually achieve full airspace integration, I think to move from operations in segregated airspace, where we are at the moment, the next step has to be to actually then take the operational envelope into controlled airspace, because then you can rely on NATS, as it is in the UK, to provide the necessary separation assurance to complement the onboard detect and avoid systems that Ray was actually referring to earlier on. So CESAR's a really useful programme. It's embracing RPAS. There are work packages now that at this moment are actually being defined for the start of Horizon 2020, which will kick off next year. So they are addressing it, with a proper, robust sort of approach, but it is only a partial solution for the larger type of air vehicles that will operate in controlled airspace. because to do that airspace typically starts in the UK at about 10,000 feet. So, you've got to get up there, and then you've got to have the necessary equipage, and there are a set of requisites that you actually need to meet to actually be allowed into the controlled airspace.
So there's nothing in the pipeline to deal with the smaller ones then, or
there isn't anything in a structured way at a European level that's very close at this stage. And I think there's an additional concern that at the moment that sector of the market is very much driven by small businesses as well. And often small businesses can have a challenge in being able to engage in some of the larger programmes. So there are issues there at a number of levels, I would say.
I think also too, you mentioned EU airspace, and airspace is of course everywhere. And what Neil was referring to were the corridors that we use as A-class airspace to keep particularly passenger airliners secure. The operation of RPAS beyond line of sight, of course, they can operate anywhere, and they should be able to be able to operate anywhere, because that is where the work that they would undertake, that's where that work would be carried out. So therefore, to say that SESAR will eventually provide any necessary infrastructure, I think is hoping for the best at the moment.
But you feel, I think I gather from what you're saying is that you feel there ought to be research into this
Absolutely,
area, which is growing
absolutely,
so
and I think some of the EU packages that have been put forward for development in this particular area, unfortunately, have been looking a little bit too far over the horizon. We have an aviation infrastructure which is a global infrastructure. It's not just a UK or a European infrastructure. We can enable unmanned systems into that infrastructure with some sensible caveats and some sensible technologies proven and confidence built in those technologies to be able to do it. I think the problem is it's a little bit all-embracing. There's an industry that wants to get moving here. There is technology that we have available to us in the UK, and we're not applying it well enough and efficiently enough.
Yes. I was just going to ask, where is this going in the growth pattern? Because one of the things we're looking at is obviously the potential for growth
Absolutely.
in the UK economy and indeed in growth in overseas sales. But if issues like this are not sorted out, that's not likely to happen.
No,
quickly, is it?
And I think if we wait for regulation, I think the tail is probably wagging the dog. It's certainly at the moment, this waiting game has been going on for over 10 years in the industry, and I think it's prevented a lot of companies making investment in research and development and actually taking a capability to demonstration and to market to enable systems to be produced, so enabling the regulation to meet those systems and the infrastructure to be regulated accordingly.
But looking at the industry as a whole and beyond the EU, I mean, the events in the US haven't helped, have they?
No, not at all.
It's a bit of a difficult one.
No.
Yes. Right, thank you. Lord Brooke.
To come back to RPAS and the fears, and this is about the small ones too primarily, about the fears about invasions of privacy and the potential physical threat to people and property. We opened that with some conversations on sense and avoid. Could this apply down the line to the smaller ones? The issue of tracing who is controlling particularly the small ones. Have you any ideas on how that could be tackled? That CAA are well removed at the moment from those individuals. Indeed, everybody's well removed from those individuals. Generally, we would like to have any suggestions you might have put to us about areas that we should be looking at.
I think that certainly the concern of, if you like, what I would maybe call the new hobbyist community, so those operators that really don't consider an RPAS as an aircraft are, as you say, of the biggest concern, and it's particularly of concern to the small UAS community, which is currently commercial, because, as you said, looking at the situation in the US, it could have a severe impact on that business base of all of the industry which is currently in operation. So I think it's of concern to the industry as a whole to make sure that we maintain that professionalism and, as you say, a way of being able to police operations which impact on privacy. It's very difficult, I think, to look to see what could be done to prevent that, because obviously any operator, it's difficult to physically prevent somebody operating a UAS in that manner. But I think maybe there are two things that we could look at which maybe would make it, or begin to make a difference. There's been reference already this evening to not knowing who's controlling an RPAS. I think if there was some mechanism to be able to at least have some sort of point of sale record, some sort of license, and not just now to commercial UAS, but to UAS across the board, then that gives there is data there's some information that could be used, so that there's some form of license for all users. And I think if we compare with other operations, simply driving a car or traditional operations where there's an obvious deterrent, where you know that there's an element of, there's a good chance of prosecution if you don't obey whatever the order is, in this case the air navigation order. So if there's a much higher emphasis on prosecuting those operators who actually do contravene the air navigation order, and there's a very high level of communication of that, then I think that begins to form more of a deterrent to those operators who may well be looking otherwise to break the air navigation order because they feel that there will be no prosecution. But that will be resource intensive, so I think that has to be borne in mind, that it will require additional resource to do that.
Have you
If I could add to that.
Yes.
I spoke earlier about the potential for a network of communications in this country. Mm-hmm. The network of communications would be helping the operator of the system, irrespective of its size, but it would also be monitoring its use. So therefore that monitoring means that we do know where they are, we do know what they're doing, we do know who's operating it. I think if we took a soft approach currently to what is now an issue that's could potentially grow out of control, I think we could be too late before something quite serious happens.
Yes, I was actually thinking of bolting the stable door after the horses.
Rather.
Yes, quite. The fact is, how would we separate such a scheme from the hobbyists, from the model airplane people?
Well,
because they have been allowed to run free for so long, and to try and get them back into the box, mixing metaphors madly, but it's impossible, because even when you buy these things, it doesn't say anything about what care should be taken or anything.
No.
I think there are, in terms of the hobbyist market, there are two hobbyist markets. There's, if you like, the more traditional hobbyist market, which will be regulated at a level by BMFA, and that's the level of operation where the CAA currently is seeing as quite a low risk, because they are, if you like, professional hobbyists. They have a lot of experience. So I think a lot of the sales are in that market, that sector of the market, which is a relatively low risk. So I think to focus on that, the new hobbyist is absolutely critical. And yes, there are a lot of aircraft which are in use at the moment, but the longer we leave it before we do something, the more serious that situation is going to become.
Also, we have to consider, of course, it's an aircraft. It's not just an aircraft. It's actually got what they call a payload, and the payload is invariably a camera, so then the camera becomes as equally as important to regulate from a privacy and data protection point of view as does the safety of the flying system itself. So you've got two issues that we've got to address.
On the last point, if I may, did you want to come in? Sorry, there.
No, absolutely.
Sorry.
It's very much an educational, personal, public awareness approach, I think, which needs to be the imperative in terms of...
Do you think the existing regulations on privacy and data protection are adequate for this purpose? And secondly, last week when we had the CAA giving evidence to us, they did indicate that there were, on the air navigation order, there were 2 specific articles capable of amendment. We didn't at the time get the chance to go into those, but no doubt you will be aware of what probably those articles are. And would you care to comment on them? Help us with them.
Yeah, is the privacy and data protection laws sufficient? Well, I would think on paper they probably are. Whether we could get them to apply to the hobbyists and the people that can buy these flat pack for £500 for Christmas is going to be quite another thing, and I do wonder whether they would even address the fact that those laws exist. My biggest concern is having the laws in place, both from a safety point of view and from a data protection point of view. How are we going to police that? That is going to be. But with that network of information coming to and from the operating systems, then we do have a chance to do that. But there will be, Pandora's box has been opened. We've got to bring them back in. I'm not sure we can do that.
Lord Haskell, you want to quickly...
Thank you. With all this in place, what's the likelihood of hackers taking over control of these RPAS?
Not very much at the moment, thankfully. That's one of the things we are, I think, quite capable of at this stage. The crypto capability, which is significant at a very high level, and bear in mind, of course, there are crypto capabilities on normal jet airliners as well. So a lot of the transmissions and the traffic over the airways is being safeguarded, and that can be carried out. That is something that we do have in our favour.
I think on the larger sort of the online site operations, obviously, military platforms will use encrypted data links, so they'll have those secure, that secure data link, whether it be for command and control or for dissemination of sensor product. But I think it's an interesting, and it is I think it is a conundrum for the future, that as the window of operations for civil RPAS extends, you're going to have to look at the integrity of that data link, because yes, at the moment they're battery powered, they have limited endurance, and line of sight is as far as they go. As those boundaries begin, and people want to extend them, then the integrity of the data link is a key topic, and it's going to have to be something that's going to need to be addressed in the future, I think, to sustain the market in that area.
And it isn't the only key topic.
No,
it seems to be full of these sort of challenges. Look, I'm afraid we're going to have a division very shortly, which means that we will be absent for about 12 minutes, I think. When the division occurs, you won't be able to think for the noise, so we're going to try and get through as much as we can. The Minister is actually speaking at the moment, but after this there'll probably be a division. So I just wanted to warn you that it's all going to come. Now, Lord Fern, isn't it Lord Fern?
Madam Chairman,
Yes,
the UK has a significant but underused resource in the West Wales Airport and the National Aeronautical Centre. How could this facility and other resources, such as higher education institutions, be used to encourage more UK RPAS manufacturers?
It is significant. It is not completely under-resourced or underutilised, but it struggles to send out the message that it is available for use. One of the things that seems to be happening in the industry, there's a focus of attention on the whole system, and not very much attention paid to the individual subsystems that enable the whole system to operate. I'm talking about things like ground control stations, command and control capabilities and other navigation potential for, and even the network that controls these things is another instance. We do find at the NAC ourselves in a situation where we've created it and they will come, but we're still waiting for them to come. But they are moving slowly. There is beginning to become some recognition. And in a way, one would think, well, if we create regulation, then that is a focus, if you like, to the requirements for technology. But in actual fact, we need to do more to advertise the fact that there is a technological requirement for a number of different areas of this industry. And this is something that we're trying to promote now by going into a variety of initiatives and bringing those to the fore. We already have the capability of operating. We already have the most advanced and capable environment for this type of work anywhere in the world. But we now need to actually awaken our industries and our academic centres to maximise that.
When did you give out an invitation?
About 10 years ago.
10 years ago.
I mean, we were a little early on the block, I'm afraid. But having said that, we've always been in the right place. We've always been in the right place at the right time, and it will be utilised. I have no fear of that.
What's the Watchkeepers system?
Watchkeeper system is operating out of West Wales Airport at the moment, and it was the only centre in the UK that it could actually operate from. So it was rather fortunate that we embarked on this. So we did somebody a favour.
And created jobs, I hope.
And we've created a lot of jobs, and we've also introduced an awful lot of money into the local economy every year from a standing start. So there's a long way to go with this area.
Right.
And that's an issue.
West Wales Airport.
Sorry?
Who runs it?
My company runs it,
Yes.
West Wales Airport Limited. It used to be Aberporth Airfield years ago. It was acquired in 2002.
Mr. Watson or Dr. Wolfe, is there anything you'd like to add to that particular question of Lord Ferns?
I would like to add a couple of comments relating to HEI resource. I think the HEI resource in the UK has a huge amount to add here, and there is a lot of research ongoing at the moment. But particularly from the perspective of small UAS, there is a lot more that could be done. And this really comes back to the availability of research funding looking at the small scale. So the issues we referred to earlier on, that some of the larger Horizon 2020 programmes are probably more geared to the large end. So there is currently a small UAS consortium which is pulling together a project to look at some of these key issues. But again, there is quite a strong limit to the resources that are available to bid into for consortia like that to be able to move forward.
Thank you. Lord Ferns, is there anything else you wanted to ask?
No. Except that I don't get the industry being involved at all, by the sound of it, from the actual technical knowledge that's going on. Does that fed all the time?
No, there is a lot of involvement with small companies, and I think there is also the challenge of the business model of how small operators can work together with academia and the end user. And I think that in part is all part of development and R&D programs that need to go forward, looking at the business model as well as the technology. So it is operating at a level, but there's a lot more could be done.
Thank you. Mr. Watson, you wanted to add something?
Really, just to add to what Sue said, that in terms of the business model, I think that governs the pace as well on the larger community. So, as the regulatory frameworks are established and become institutionalised, confidence grows, and you reach that sort of market takeoff, then the next stage is going to have to be to actually to trial the capabilities, and I think hopefully then in terms of capacity and utilisation, you'll see things change within the next couple of years.
And finally, Mr. Mann, you want to come in?
Yes, just finally, if I may, one of the things, of course, that is driving this is the marketplace for their use. Yes. I still think to some degree there's a little reluctance on the part of industry to recognise that there's really a marketplace out there. And so we have quite a large job to do. We have to ensure that we can enable them to operate, that we can give them the best possible accommodation, and that we can demonstrate to them where that marketplace is and to some degree how they could reach that marketplace. Even the company now that is supposed to be the equivalent to an airport operator has now had to produce its own roadmap for unmanned systems to reach certification and to be put to work in a marketplace that does exist.
Thank you. Now, a final question to you is Lord Wilson's. We'll try and get it in before the question.
I'll do it quite quickly. A possible limitation, that's radio spectrum. It's been suggested to us, particularly by the Royal Aeronautical Society, that this is a potential problem. Now, A, is it, and B, if it is it the sort of thing that can be dealt with at a national level, or should it be European, or should it be international?
I think it's where you start. I think we should really be starting within this country. We have such capability within ourselves. I can't answer on behalf of Ofcom with regards to what is actually available and how much the spectrum is squeezed by things like mobile telephones and so on. But I think that there are certainly ways of operating that will enable us to have the links, the radio links secure, and to have those links repeat themselves within a network which could be the whole of the UK. So I think if we begin to worry about the availability of spectrum at this time, it is assuming that if there's only a small amount of spectrum available, then by definition we have the potential for security breaches of that spectrum and interference with that spectrum, whether it's accidental or otherwise. But I think it really comes down to how we look to the command and control capability, which is I keep mentioning this because it's actually a subject matter. You could throw it towards a university or a private company, but it is something that people can bring to the fore. And there is technology out there that is capable today.
Sorry, could I just follow up a moment? Are you suggesting that you don't think there is a limitation on spectrum, or you just don't know?
I'm not absolutely certain, but my best guess from where I sit at the moment, which is limited, as I say, I don't have that much detail with regards to spectrum availability, but I do know that we have enough to work with, and I think if we use it successfully, we can do this. We're squeezing spectrum all the time. We're doing it in manned aviation. We're doing it with radar and so on and so on. So there's a lot of people have got to play.
Could you actually give us additional evidence on that? Could you write us a note about it? That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Has spectrum been allocated?
Sorry?
Has spectrum been allocated?
Yes.
It's the World Radio Conference, which is the real decision-making forum for spectrum, and they have actually allocated for terrestrial spectrum. There has been some spectrum allocated. I think there's a huge debate now on how best to utilise that. And also the other thing is for spaceborne operations, they're looking at satellite comms, and there's now a huge debate in terms of, and I think those are two key agenda topics for the next World Radio Conference. Trouble is, it's 2015, so it's they're periodic.
So 15 months away.
Expediency probably needs to be looked at.
I would concur with Neil that it's essential to go via the World Radio Conference, because if we're going to be operating between countries, then really simply looking internally is not going to be sufficient.
Well, thank you very much. Now, any other points by members? No? And any questions that you think we should have asked you that we haven't? Gaps in our knowledge. But if you think of things that we really ought to know, we'd be very grateful if you could actually submit us some written evidence. All right? Oh,
Chairman,
yes, Lord Brooke.
It's probably Talis I'm seeking. Okay. Is there any way in which we can find the means of installing some technology in the machines which will now enable us right from the beginning to know when they're produced in the factory, by whom, and then in turn we'll know how we can trace them?
Yes, I mean it's degrees of sophistication, in terms of how. But yes, and yes, all parts will have, are traceable. I mean that's a requisite to achieve a certificate of airworthiness. So you'd need to be able to trace each component actually within an RPAS. to actually, achieve a certificate of airworthiness as things stand at the moment. So, yes, I don't know if you're looking for something more sophisticated than that, but that
Well, if we can chip $6 million and try to trace who owns them, a relatively small number of these, one would have thought technology could have been developed so that something could be embedded in them that could not be taken out easily. Is anybody working on that?
I'll take that way, and perhaps I could get back to you on that one.
Thank you.
Very grateful. Thank you. Lady Hooper, you said you wanted to
Thank you.
do that.
You said, I think, that you were not in touch with anybody in the European Commission in this field. Are you in touch with other bodies or people who are in the field in other European Union countries? Is there any sort of meeting of minds about this? Do you have a forum to discuss?
There's a lot of meeting of minds each year, I think. It would be difficult to keep up with all of the conferencing that's going on with RPAS at the moment throughout Europe. I think the problem is that for the past few years we've been rather talking to our naval to some degree. It's seized up. There's nothing much new to say. And I think, I know Jerry Corbett from the CAA was giving evidence previously, and he now says this is as much as I can tell you at the moment, because nobody is bringing anything to the CAA, nobody is actually offering anything to the CAA for certification, and yet they are quite prepared to receive systems for certification. And nowhere in the world has any civil aviation authority ever received any system for certification. They seem to be waiting for regulation. It's rather a back to front affair, I'm afraid.
Very confusing.
Chicken and egg.
But it does seem that it's becoming a very live issue at the moment.
It's a live issue for different reasons, Lord Chairman. The situation as far as the systems that are out there now are concerned have brought altogether another concern for the whole of the RPAS industry, not just the one end. So we're having to address all of it.
Well, thank you.
Worth adding, sorry.
Sorry?
Sorry, it probably is worth adding that, I think now that the European Commission have published their airspace integration roadmap and charged responsibility to EASA for the regulatory, to CESAR for the R&T aspects of delivering the roadmap, that I think there's a little bit more traction, and I think the pace of progress will improve. Societal aspects is, if you look at the annexes to the roadmap, the thickest annex is actually looking at the societal issues. So we used to refer to those as soft issues. They're not.
I think as well on the societal issues, there is quite a strong role to be played by industry practitioners themselves, by the small companies developing codes of practice and becoming professional bodies to ensure that there is a professional code of conduct that can be adhered to.
So everybody's got to be on their toes, in other words. Well, thank you very much indeed. It's been a very useful session and we're very grateful to you. And you've managed to get out before the bell too. You have all three of you been here for the last session?
Yes.
Yes, okay, so you know what the format... Oh, sorry.
About 20 minutes of it.
Oh, well, okay. Well, first of all, a very big welcome to you. And I'll just get my things. Next page. You have a list of interests. Do they have a list of interests completed by the youth? No, you will have, yes. This is a formal evidence-taking session of the committee, and a full shorthand note will be taken. This will be put on the public record in printed form and on the parliamentary website. You'll be sent a copy of the transcript, and you'll be able to revise it in terms of minor errors. The session is on the record, it's being webcast. You're welcome to submit written supplementary evidence after this session, and we do value that because sometimes things come up which sort of surprise us and then need a bit of amplification. Witnesses and members again are reminded to speak up so that everyone will be able to hear you all properly. Does that mean it's... Right, and then the last thing is we'll be able to, the brief opening remarks. You were here when I warned you that this was going to happen, and it's been 12 minutes, and we'll be back. And I'm sorry about that. apologies for that, but it's one of the hazards of coming to the Houses of Parliament to give evidence. Right. Sorry, I must get my act together. Right, now I'm asking the first question.
Before
Oh, sorry. Oh.
Can I declare an interest?
Oh, yes. Yes, quite.
Because I was president of BALPA for some 29 years, so I know a little about it. And I think it's appropriate that I should declare that.
Right, okay. And Lord Brooke, would you declare?
I think a very indirect link with BALPA. The General Secretary of BALPA used to work with me, or I used to work with him many years ago.
Okay. And also, SPAD, Specialist Advisor, knows two of the witnesses. Yes, okay. And I suppose I don't have an interest, do I? The fact that I was on the board of British Airways for 12 years? No, probably not. And on the Safety Committee board. Right, now, the first question I'm going to ask is, what do you see as the main impediments to the development of commercial RPAS operations such as mapping, filming and precision farming in Europe? And does the Commission's communication on RPAS address them?
My Lord Chairman, would it be possible for BALPA to make an opening statement? Is that possible?
Yes, actually, and what I should have done, of course, I'm sorry, I should have done for the benefit of the transcript was to ask you to give your names and if you wanted to make an opening statement. Thank you so much, Mr. Brown. I'm sorry about that.
I'm Captain Andy Brown. I'm an elected pilot representative for the British Airline Pilots Association. I'm on the National Executive Committee. I'm the chairman of the RPAS working group of BALPA, and my paid employment is as an airline captain in a UK airline.
Thank you.
We have an opening statement?
Yes.
Should I do it
yes.
now? Or?
Okay.
Okay, it's less than 2 minutes. Firstly, for various reasons, economic as well as other reasons, BALPA does not consider that unmanned passenger aircraft will be operating in the near future. However, we consider cargo aircraft, because they do not require life support systems, could become a reality in maybe 10 years. If they operate close to centres of population, and if they operate in the same airspace as other aircraft, then they should be at least as safe, if not safer, than current manned cargo aircraft. Secondly, we understand that across a European consortium headed by Thales is looking into operating the intentional reduction of crew in flight, i.e. down to a single pilot flying during the cruise using associated RPAS technology. Flight safety has been enhanced by the requirement to use 2 pilots for cross-checking purposes, such as headings, heights, speeds, decision-making, as well as ensuring, for instance, the correct engine is shut down in the event of fire or failure. If single pilots flying in the cruise becomes a reality in the future, it is vital there is cross-checking between 2 pilots at all stages of flight. Finally, of immediate and pressing concern is the proliferation of small RPAS, quadcopters or multirotors of up to 7 kilograms. Many are operated safely by responsible operators, but we know there is a significant number who operate either through ignorance or willful disregard of the air navigation order. They are cheap to buy and easy to operate. Our concern is that people will fly them close to airports, which could cause a collision, or they might try to take photos of a motorway accident and cause a collision hazard for an air ambulance helicopter. There are ways of stopping multi-rotors flying near airports with a technique called geofencing, and we believe that this should be mandated. We believe a combination of awareness, education and regulation is required to reduce the risk of collision of small RPAS with other aircraft. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain Brown. Can I ask you to send us a note about geofencing? Is that what you call it? Geofencing?
Yes.
Yes, okay, right, thank you. Mr. Clayton.
My name is Mr. Gary Clayton. I represent UAVS, the UK Trade Association. I have paid employment by one of the major defence companies.
Thank you. Mr. Keith Hayward.
Yeah, my name is Professor Keith Hayward. I'm currently Head of Research at the Royal Aeronautical Society, and my primary interests in the sector are industrial and commercial.
You mean manufacturing
and markets.
Yes, I see. Thank you. My question is, what do you see as the main impediments to the development of commercial RPAS operations such as mapping, filming, and precision farming in Europe, and does the Commission's communication on RPAS address them? Open to you.
Okay. I'm rather concerned that we focus in on particular applications because when RPAS started to become popular as a subject a few years ago, there was a series of applications as thought of by the technologists. I believe these applications are very much what is being done within the regulations and the technology advancement today.
Yes.
I think that like the mobile phone or the computer industry, the really big applications are the ones that the entrepreneurs will think of when we make the technology available for them to think of their business cases. So as far as specifically mapping, filming, precision farming, very good. But I think that the wider use of RPAS will be in something that we sat here today won't have thought of. But an entrepreneur will, and cargo is perhaps one that we can think of. But most of the uses of, certainly the small ones today, which are operating, are doing things we didn't think of beforehand. And there's people who have come across the technology and said, I can do this with it. So I'm not sure we actually know that. As far as the Commission's communication, I think it identifies a load of areas that need to be looked at with a series of actions, but I don't think it actually addresses any of them other than to say there's all these questions we don't know. So I would say it probably doesn't address any of the issues, but it does identify some of the issues that need to be looked into.
Yes, well, I think it's a very valid comment, of course, but none of us know about the future, and surely, at least if we deal with the situations we have on the ground now, or in the air now, that it will give us some sort of pointers as to what might develop with the other technological and manufacturing developments that come too. So it's not a waste of time looking at it. And some people are very concerned about it from the point of view, as we were discussing the last time, on privacy and data protection and that sort of thing. And as a result, this committee, which is solely to scrutinise legislation, directives, information from the Commission, and scrutinise it to see if, in our view, it was appropriate or for the Commission to have a role, or whether it's something that we should deal with, and in turn to liaise with other member states on their views, so that all legislation coming from Europe is as good as can be, and also for giving information to our government on how we see it, based on our scrutiny, so that they can adopt what necessarily they need to do when they talk to the Commission and the legislation becomes law. Right, time I'm told. Okay, fine. Thank you.
Yeah, if I may, Chairman, I think the general point about trying to evaluate the market is going to be difficult. It's the proverbial bottling fog at the moment, when you just don't know exactly the extent and the direction in which the major and most profitable and most significant market developments will occur. But to my mind, I think we'd have to think well beyond the small RPAS to think in terms of a real significant commercial breakthrough. When you have platforms capable of carrying significant payloads that will deal with all sorts of communication capabilities, sensor packages beyond simple photography. And at that point, you're dealing with large systems that will have to be integrated into controlled airspace, particularly if you're thinking in European terms. If you're looking at tundra or prairies or all over the sea, there's more scope. But if you want to use these things for that kind of facility in a crowded, congested airspace like Europe, we are going to think in terms of the way in which the technology and the protocols will evolve to develop the ability for these platforms to operate in controlled airspace, which is clearly where the Commission is directing its attention. To some extent, industry is, certainly the larger aerospace companies, are concerned to see that develop The UK is certainly working on stuff like See and Avoid through our Astrea programme. So you can see there's a sense of urgency about this, which to some extent I think the European Union, the European Commission has recognised, but the scope is yet to be defined.
Thank you. Captain Brown.
We believe that we do need harmonious, workable, robust and high standard regulations. In Japan, I think, as you know from the report, they increased their RPAS operators from 18 to 14,000 up to 2005. Now I believe that figure stands at 18,000. BALPA does believe in good, firm, robust regulation, as we have seen with the success of airlines. So we do believe in that. In terms of impediments, we believe there could be public perception, could be an impediment to particularly small RPAS. I think with these little phantom small RPAS that are being sold, some say between 1,000 and 2,000 a month. They're just 1.5 kilos, so big, quadcopters, and they're very easy to fly. They can be probably operated by a child. We think that that sort of thing, there could be a real annoyance factor from the public. There could be accidents, low-level accidents, which could be an impediment. And of course, I think in previous discussion we've been discussing privacy, which goes without saying.
Right, Lord Haskell.
Thank you for your views on regulation. We're, of course, a European committee, so we're interested in the regulatory arrangements between EASA and the Joint Authorities for Rulemaking on Unmanned Systems, JARIS. Do you think that there is a clear delineation of responsibility? And is there involvement of the industry in the creation of these regulations?
There used to be a very good organisation, worldwide organisation called the Joint Aviation Authority, JAA, and then when EASA was created, taking at that time 17 or 20 countries out of the JAA under the EASA banner, the JAA became very ineffective, effectively, because so much of it had gone away into a single voice. I think the Joint Authorities for Rulemaking is actually a positive thing. It's starting to get the aviation authorities back into a wider worldwide community to discuss these issues, from the European, the FAA and a few other centralised bodies. So it's almost like the JAA coming back through stealth, and I think it's taken a little time to get going. It has published some position papers. I think it's recently changed its chairman. The new chairman's name escapes me, sorry. There's a little bit of playing for position within the JARIS at the moment. But I think it will settle down to being a very valuable tool between the aviation authorities to jointly create that strong regulation and obviously advise the EASA and ultimately ICAO to a position through the aviation authorities, which is of course where industry then helps provide information, data into the aviation authorities to take to those meetings. So I think delineation of responsibility, EASA has a European role, JARIS can have a wider role. It is the aviation authorities and other interested parties rather than a commission organisation. So I think there is a delineation, but there is a bit of play on who's controlling which bit at the moment.
If I may, there was certainly some suspicion in the early days of the EASA that they wouldn't be able to perform to the same degree of technical excellence that the national bodies like CAA and the French and the German equivalent had been able to successfully implement. But over the years that EASA has been operating, confidence has grown in its capability to deliver effective certainly on the airworthiness dimension. That's been, of course, its first and primary responsibility. My own particular view on this is that if you want to see RPAS operation across Europe, you have to have European-based regulations. It's a clear matter of subsidiarity. If you have beyond the line of sight operation, some of these beyond the line of sight operations will go across a frontier. Mm-hmm. And to my mind, it's almost self-evident that you need a common European regulation that will affect both the reliability and the airworthiness of the platform and all the other regulatory aspects of integration with air traffic control, perhaps a European privacy right. I don't know. But if you're operating these things across frontiers, or with the potential to operate across frontiers, we would be better off with a cross-European regulatory framework.
So you don't think it's a subsidiarity issue then?
I think
where national governments have their own competencies.
National competence is fine, I think, for within visual control,
yes.
And I think that's where the CAA still fits, as I understand
Thank
it.
You. I misunderstood the first part of your response.
And of course, just adding to your point there, Keith, that the national authorities advise JARAS and EASA, so it's not a separate body; it's actually a cohesive.
Would you like to suggest a timetable as to sort of when we'll have regulations from these various organisations?
Well, I think I mean, in a sense, both the US FAA and the European EASA are working along similar time frameworks. The EASA, I think, is looking, and I think in various, if I remember rightly, the pattern is about a 2 or 3 stage delivery. If we go to, if you like, the El Dorado of the exercise, which is full integration into commercial, into controlled airspace, I think the EASA European program is putting, I think it's 2025 as a potential target. The FAA is bringing it a little closer, but they have a more restricted view of what they expect this to deliver. But nonetheless, I think mid-2020s is something realistic.
Thank you. Now, any other comments?
Yes.
Yes.
In answer to your first question, we had nothing to add really on that. For your second part of your question, how would you like to see industry involvement in the development of regulations work in practice? We feel that whilst industry should have a say in the development of regulations, the national aviation authorities should not allow themselves to be swayed by purely financial arguments, because ultimately they will have to take total responsibility for the development, implementation and enforcement of these regulations. In other words, without being too blunt, they cannot be in the pockets of industry. As whatever the manufacturers say, the primary objective of a manufacturer is to make money. And clearly, you want to do it in the safest way possible in order to make some money. We also feel that RPAS is so new that stronger guidance in the early years is what is really required.
Lord Brooke.
Thank you, Lord Chairman. I'd pick up really on some of the contributions that have been made earlier in looking at the smaller RPAS. Do you see the growth in employment coming primarily from the smaller ones, being used for novel applications and entrepreneurs thinking of something fresh each day, or do you see them being used for small cargo operations, then larger cargo operations, and taking it to the ultimate as a solution to the perceived shortage of pilots for conventional aircraft operations, including the carriage of passengers, as ultimately being a possibility for RPAS?
I'll give you the academic's classic argument, it's too early to tell. There is a sort of clear emergence of a division in the industry. You're perfectly right that there is already an innovative, vital, small RPAS community. But many of them are using off-the-shelf, out of Maplin purchases. Single camera, off it goes, taking photographs like newspapers or private individuals seeking to make a few pennies out of the results. There is a potential market for all sorts of things at this level, but I think most analysts suggest that you've got to wait for the more sophisticated multi-payload system to come on stream and to be proven and to be turned into a valid piece of equipment. And again, the amount of money being made by manufacturing is relatively trivial. The market forecast for the hardware out to 2023 is between $50 billion and $70 billion, which is trivial compared to the overall output of the aerospace industry. But then you have to think in terms of the multiplier effect of downstream use. And it's the people that will come along, oh, that's an interesting use for that technology. There's why I can see a particular application for this 150, relatively cheap, 150 kilogram platform. And if I play around with a sensor package, I can deliver this to a client. And it's that kind of market opportunity which is really where the value is going to be delivered in this industry.
But Mr. Brown did mention the growth in Japan in a relatively short space of time, and there must be some analysis of what the breakdown is between, I think, what CAA referred to them as A, B and C categories, with A being the very small ones and C being the larger ones. So there must be some information available to give some indication of what is happening at the moment, and that must give some pointers to the future.
Going back to your question was about where's the growth coming from. At the moment, you've got to treat this market as two things at the moment. You've got the small ones that are within a line of sight because they provide the collision avoidance by the pilot being able to see the vehicle. There are moves to put more regulation into that market from the CAA, but also there's also moves to slowly expand that box through the experience being gained of responsible operators within that box. At the same time, we've got the large operators doing research into sense and avoid systems, communication systems, prognostics and health monitoring, etc., etc., all the things that you would need to fly an aircraft safely. I think it's when they do that research and they get those systems from the CAA saying you can fit them onto larger aircraft, then inevitably you get the miniaturization such that that can be used on ever smaller systems, which will then open the market for the smaller ones, because they'll be able to carry that technology away from line of sight. But you need to almost to push the big systems in order to create the technology to allow the little systems to move out of that fixed box. And that's when the little systems will get their expansion. But I think the bigger systems will probably expand first.
Do you see any role for SMEs as far as this is concerned?
You could say a large proportion of the RPAS industry are already SMEs, and in a sense, it's been the larger aerospace companies that have struggled to catch up. If you take an American example, Boeing have had to acquire several competencies from relatively small companies in order to get them into the market, into the technology that will enable them to develop larger RPAS. So in a way, there's a peculiar dichotomy about the industry. There's a whole number of people working on these systems, but then you switch to the very expensive end of the business, the combat platforms, and that's very much the domain of the established, powerful aerospace and defence companies.
Right. Very interesting. Yes, Captain Brown.
We believe that it's the miniaturisation of stability systems, GPS systems, navigation systems, and the technology in batteries, which has allowed far more capacity, electrical capacity, to be put into a smaller battery that has led to the success of small RPAS. They may be able for 20 minutes, 25 minutes from now. In a few years' time, it might be an hour and a half. So I see that there's going to be an explosion of small RPAS with applications we have not even thought about. There aren't many RPAS in the region of just over 20 kilograms. There's a few model flying aircraft around. But we believe economics could be in favour of large cargo aircraft. It may be led by the military, trying to get cargo aircraft into hostile areas. They do have helicopters that fly, remote-controlled helicopters that fly into hostile areas. The thing about large cargo aircraft is that they need no pressurisation. That's a saving. There's no passengers to worry about. Costs against them are ground infrastructure and security. But I think we would suggest that we're not too sure how good this technology is. Therefore, if they are to be operated, they should be operated initially over water, and sparsely occupied areas, certainly initially until they can be proven. You asked about the carriage of passengers, which is, I guess, that's our subject. Passengers add a huge dimension to the problem of unpiloted, unmanned vehicles. We believe that passengers, they want the pilot to have a vested interest in the safe operation of the aircraft. And he can only really have a vested interest if he is sat in it rather than on a flight deck in an office. So we think there will be passenger resistance to unmanned aircraft. I mentioned life support systems. You need life support systems for human beings to go up to 37,000 feet. You need pressurization. So that's a cost. Not just the installation, but also the fuel that you can use for that. Passengers going on long journeys will require food and water, so they will need cabin crew to give that out to them. And we very often have passengers with problems, heart attacks, so we're going to need somebody with some knowledge of medical aid. I also wonder whether it's a good idea to put 200 football supporters into an unmanned aircraft and send them down to Barcelona to watch a football match. I'm not sure whether that's a great idea. We need, in other words, to have good order and behaviour on an aircraft. We don't want people smoking in the toilets because that's potentially dangerous. And when things go wrong, we might need to carry out an emergency evacuation of the aircraft. And I think what I'm building up to is we'll need a captain for this.
You need a pilot.
You don't
need a
want
pilot. I'm trying to look at this future RPAS, and it's a long way ahead. I know, Keith was absolutely right. What will this future RPAS aircraft look like? It'll have some sort of station which diagnoses all the problems that the aircraft has had in flight with hydraulics, electrics, engines, and somebody's going to have to interface with that. So my feeling is there's going to be a flight deck there. So you can see where I'm coming from.
Yes, I think we've got the idea, actually, Captain Brown. Yes, just about. Right, thank you. Lord Clinton Davis, your question.
Four,
yes, 4.
as far as small RPAs are concerned, they are allowed in the UK with basic levels of competence as far as the pilots are concerned. But for large RPAs, the CAA is hoping to introduce a requirement which is similar to a commercial pilot's license. How do you view this?
I'm not a professional pilot, so I have no interest to declare whatsoever. I think the truth of the matter, my lord, is that already it is a skilled operation to operate something like a Predator or Reaper. The big military systems require a fair degree of piloting competence or air awareness. I remember that a pilot referred to it as air awareness. Could only be achieved by having experience of operating and flying a vehicle themselves. I think to some extent this is a view that has been gainsaid by experience, that many of the current operators of these large systems at long range, well beyond sight, from operating from Nellis Air Base in Nevada with the aircraft over Afghanistan, they're now trained on simulators, and that's sufficient. And when it's not carrying carrying passengers. So they are particularly well-trained personnel. And that's one of the interesting things that might hamper the development of some of the commercial uses of the RPAS system, the hidden cost of operation, of having an extensive set of individuals monitoring the system, flying the system to a degree, and then taking down and taking note of the data that's been generated, which does lead us to the implication of developing onboard autonomy, which is a rather more difficult set of technology to comprehend, where the aircraft itself makes decisions about its flight environment and its own situational awareness. That will reduce considerably the demands of operational requirement. It also might reduce some of the demands of bandwidth, which the Society has mentioned in its evidence.
Thank you.
Bearing in mind I also have no vested interest in being a pilot. I think it's interesting you say it's similar to commercial pilot's license. I think it's a perfectly valid place for the CAA to be at this point in time. My view and the CAA's approach to all of this has been we will move as we learn. With the small systems, they've waited till they've learned more, now they're bringing in some more.
Cut off mid-sentence. I'm sorry, pardon? Yeah, but we can't hear because it doesn't actually allow us time to hear. So I'm afraid we're going to have to leave you for about another 12 minutes. I'm really sorry about this. I thought we might get through it. Please be patient. Mr. Clayton, you were actually in the middle of giving us your reply, weren't you? Yeah, and you want to continue, don't you?
Certainly did. Certainly, Lord Chairman.
No, I do think it would be quite disruptive. Right, okay. No, he's not here. We've got... We'll ask, would it be a good idea to ask the question again? No, forget it, no. You continue.
I'll continue, yes.
No.
I'm going to have to start again because I can't remember where I was in the sentence.
That's fine, that's fine.
I think it's similar to is the key point in this question. I think the CAA to date have been very responsible in applying regulations as they've learnt and relaxing regulations as they've learnt. There was an interesting case with the small RPAS where they were very much restricted, and then they made some changes, and then they looked at extended line of sight as they learned and gained confidence in certain operators. I think to say that a commercial pilot licence at the moment is where they want to go, because I don't think anybody's given them evidence to say that that isn't what's needed, and therefore they do have to maintain the safety of flight for everybody, and therefore to take that approach until such time as it can be proven that somebody doesn't need that, I think is very prudent for an aviation authority to take. But we are lucky in much that our CAA is open to suggestion and sensible input and research, and takes it on board. I can't speak for other countries because I've not had to deal with this aviation authority in other countries, and they do take the views and their learning, and they are highly respected in this field, with CAP 722 giving them a very prominent position in this world, to the European Union and to ICAO. So I think the CAA are a very grown-up organisation that says, I'm going to take a prudent view until somebody can give me evidence or a good case why that view is wrong. And I wouldn't do anything else if I was them.
Starting from the small, the British Model Flying Association, they've been flying for 90 plus years with model aircraft over 20 kilograms, and flying within the Air Navigation Order, no greater than 400 feet, 500 metres line of sight, clear of other aircraft. If something comes across the airfield, then you must land, and there's no need to change that. We like the permission for aerial work that the small RPAS operators have to carry out, the ones up to 7 or 7 to 20 kilograms. They do that 2 to 3 day course for about £1,300 or so, and we encourage that. There's no need to change that. Clearly, as an airline pilot, I have to get an airline transport pilot's licence. 2 years training costs about £100,000, and the system works fairly well. However, for large RPAS, and what do we mean by large? I'm just a number out of the air, probably 150 kilograms, which is quoted. We believe that whether or not it is operating controlled airspace, then we believe there should be some sort of licence. There needs to be much more greater operator efficiency. We also believe that a small RPAS, even one as little as 1.5 to 2 kilograms, these ones that are being sold in their thousands, if you hit that at 200 to 300 miles an hour, that will do a lot of damage. So we believe small RPAS, certainly 7 and above, and possibly lower, we believe that a commercial pilot's licence should be required if you were to operate that in controlled airspace. What would this commercial pilot's licence look like? Well, I think it would certainly be a lot more comprehensive than the permission to fly that the small RPAS operators get. It may not be as comprehensive as an airline transport pilot's licence, and it would certainly be slightly different, but it would be towards that sort of level. As an indication, the university in the United States, the University of Dakota, now operates full RPAS courses at a cost of $150,000, which you'll see is about the same cost as an ATPL. And they took 120 students in 2012, so that would maybe be an indication. Yes, we do believe there should be some form of commercial pilot's licence. I wanted to... Keith brought up autonomy, autonomous vehicles that can decide what they do as they're flying along. That's something we would have a comment about. I'm not sure I would like the idea of an aeroplane that can, for instance, shut down an engine without asking a human being. An example I might give is, if you remember, Captain Sollenberger getting airborne from New York. He has a multiple bird strike. It causes both engines to flame out, and he lands safely in the River Hudson, which was a tremendous bit of airmanship. But if you had an autonomous or RPAS vehicle that got airborne, and perhaps in a slightly better situation, you have a multiple bird strike, you have one engine that is damaged but is showing a fire but is still working, and one engine that's flamed out. The autonomous vehicle or the computer might decide to shut down that one engine that is producing thrust. My point is that I think human beings are very, very much better than machines at dealing with complex situations. So we would not favour that.
I don't think the autonomous question is something that is going to be relevant to large multi-engined aircraft operating necessarily that close to an airfield. I think the notion of limited autonomy is already in place to a degree. Autonomous operation, the longer range military RPAS already fly automatedly to their theatre of operations. At which point, in many cases, they run an automated figure-of-8 racing track circuit, and they are monitored by human beings simply for the pictures and the data stream that is coming down from the platform. So I think it's a big leap from developments in autonomy and automated activity of relatively smaller RPAS to leap straight to automated commercial size vehicles.
I'd like to add to that. We always talk about, certainly with the large ones, human in the loop. We're not talking about, certainly with the large ones and conversations I've had with the CAA, about totally automated or autonomous vehicles at this point. We have conducted research in the UK into autonomy and levels of autonomy and what that would mean, but nobody's envisaging in the near future large aircraft flying autonomously. There may be automatically, but with a human in the loop, careful with the words there, but nobody has actually started to suggest that we can reach the higher levels of autonomy that the research says is possible. That's been put one side. And all large systems are usually talked about in the terms of a human in the loop.
Yes, now, this question was Lord Clinton Davis's question, and he wasn't able to come back in time. So really, to summarise, you really think that the CAA anticipating requirements similar to a commercial pilot's licence is appropriate. Do I get that's all three of you?
That was for the large RPAS.
Yes, yes.
I'm not necessarily talking 150 kilograms.
No,
at
no,
that point.
and but then
cargo aircraft.
There was supplementary. At what point should more demanding RPAS pilot licensing requirements be imposed? And the jury is out.
I would say the jury is. I think this is where it gets very difficult, because I can see where Andy's coming from, and I would have a personal interest in ensuring that the person operating an RPAS is competent, and so it doesn't land on my head. But yes. I'm also conscious that when you're trying to think in terms of the commercial exploitation of these systems, and it is the downstream activity which is really going to generate the value from the technology, we will have to be very careful to calibrate the exact requirement of piloting competence with the investment required to generate that level of competence. Because if you overqualify your pilot, your controller, and you require him or her to invest a considerable amount of money in that process, it will considerably inhibit the development of the kind of downstream activities that we want to see develop for a future economy.
Thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. Lord Clinton Davis, is that okay? Right, thank you. Yes, okay.
Do you envisage that a commercial pilot with his existing licence will automatically be entitled to man an RPAS?
No.
Or will it need an additional qualification?
No, I think the requirements for RPAS are quite different to manned flying, but I think certainly you need to understand what it is to be flying in an aircraft. It's the word, Keith brought it up, the word airmanship is very, very important. Yeah. And interestingly, I spoke to one of these chaps who does train people who do small RPAS, and he does get some airline pilots coming through. Some have maybe lost their licences, some are retiring, they just want to come along and do it. And he says there is quite a difference between those who have an aviation background and those that don't. They have this thing called airmanship, and the quality of their decision making is a lot better. And that, how you're going to put that, how you're going to get that sort of program, I don't know. But you need to be able to encourage that knowledge, experience, and quality of decision making. I would not want to become an RPAS pilot in my position.
I think I agree in as much that the answer is no, they're not automatically qualified. The key word again is similar. The word that was used before. There's going to be an awful lot of the training of the same understanding of the rules of the air and all of those activities. Highly likely to have been a pilot of some sort. Whether that would be, say, a large commercial aircraft, but we'll have an understanding and the aspects of the commercial pilot side to do with procedure.
I think, yes.
Would all be
I think we've taken that very much on board. Thank you. Lord Fern.
Thank you. RPAS can be used for varied operations. Some of these are potentially dangerous, such as dropping water on forest fires to extinguish them. How can airworthiness regulations be made flexible enough to adapt to this sort of use?
Again, I'm the non-flyer here. I think that's a question of ensuring that you have tight control regimes over the aircraft. If you recognise and can identify where the fire may be, you can limit the area which the aircraft will operate and dump its load of water. I know that necessarily may not be the case when you've got a fast-moving fire, but it is within the bounds of current technology to be able to provide safety margin sufficient for it to operate.
Are you suggesting that you would actually be able to use both an RPAS and an aircraft which is used to dumping water? I.e. the RPAS would find out where the fire was or the extent to it and then get the aircraft to go in strategically.
I'm just responding to the Noble Lord's question. I personally think that particular use is likely to prove rather difficult because it's actually picking up the water, which is a very tricky exercise and requires a high degree of airmanship, and I don't think that I don't think that's an RPAS of any description is capable of that. But I think the Noble Lord has in mind similarly risky situations, but I think they could be delineated by the use of satellite navigation positioning systems, which do allow for very precise delineation of operation.
Exactly.
I'd like to add that I don't think that the main regulations, because of the odd, dangerous situation, should be changed because there may be dangerous. What you can do is you can then end up with some special exemptions to work in certain areas with certain dangerous situations, which whether that could be a power station problem, a major fire, oil refinery. With the CAA you can probably enact special exemptions, certainly with RPAS, but what you can do, taking your forest fire example, you can, if you can pick up the water, which is a technological argument, you can, irrespective of smoke, sense the hottest points to where to put the water, of course, because you're not using eyes to find fire. So there are technological answers to a lot of this, but as far as the regulation side, which is one of the things you're looking at to do with the European communication, is you would have to look at exemptions based on your operator licence, the type of vehicle and what you were doing and where.
Thank you.
We think if RPAS can be used to replace pilots in dangerous missions, they should do so. As they say, it's a no-brainer. The military use RPAS for all dull, dirty and dangerous missions where they don't want to lose a pilot, for instance, over enemy territory. Yes, going back to the example about fighting forest fire, I think that's a great use of RPAS. You could have an RPAS there taking all the photos, and if it crashed, it wouldn't really matter. And GPS systems are so accurate now, it could be programmed that it wouldn't go. Who else would want to be flying over forest fire anyway? So, it wouldn't matter. We'd have the RPAS there as the eyes for everybody else. So there are some uses, and it should not be a problem to ensure that these rules are made flexible enough to allow them.
Thank you. I think that's very... Is that all right?
It's all right.
Now, Lady Hooper.
Thank you. The European communication, when it was published in April this year, stated industry is delaying investments until there is sufficient legal certainty on the legal framework that's offered. You've said already that operations of small RPAS are growing, but that there are apparently currently very few large civil RPAS operations. And is this because of this lack of certainty and inadequate regulation?
So if I try and take that one for a start, the small ones, we know exactly where we stand. The CAA have set the rules, and they are slowly changing the rules as they see applicable based on their knowledge. As far as the large ones, there is major research programs both in the UK and in Europe, with Australia in the UK, and you've got MidCAS and the now renamed Autarkia program in Europe, looking at various aspects. The problem we have is not a problem, wrong word, sorry. We have to be, according to Case 722 and therefore EASA, equivalent and transparent. What is equivalence? So where the rules say the pilot shall maintain a lookout out of the window and avoid a collision. A detect and avoid system is trying to do that electronically. But how good has it got to be? What has it got to be able to detect? At what distance, moving at what speed? And then be able to prove it can do that? Well, we don't know, so we're working that through with the CAA. At the same time, you've got the communication system. It doesn't exist because pilots like Andy here are actually on the aircraft. What level of latency is acceptable? What retransmission, etc., gives the same level of control. So in being equivalent as safe, there's loads of things in the regulations that we need to deal with through the research in the UK through the Australia programme. It's not until we solve those problems that the manufacturers can put a price on building a large cargo aircraft to fly unmanned. And it's not until you can put a price on an aircraft can you price an operation and make a business case. So that's why the industry is trying to drive to understand those regulatory as safe as and what technological needs are to achieve that.
If I might add, to some extent that's might be a little bit of, if not industrial obfuscation, but it's a rather more complex set of political as well as regulatory factors involved here. If we're trying to consider the kind of system which maybe develop a very much larger and expansive commercial market for RPAS operation, we are thinking, up to my mind, of the size and scale of certainly from the Thales Watchkeeper upwards, and I have in mind inevitably the American military systems Predator and Reaper, which are the classic medium altitude long endurance system with multi-sensors, all sorts of payload capacity. In short answer, there is no European requirement, military requirement for that system that seems to be generating a programme. The French and the British, the Germans have bought directly from American systems to use to satisfy military requirements. And there is no commercial business case in its own right to justify the investment in developing a European equivalent of Reaper or Predator. And until the European governments, either singly or more likely individually, can come together to produce a programme that will develop a system of that size, and one would hope technically more advanced than a Reaper or a Predator, there is little chance of a European RPAS hardware industry developing to satisfy any emerging commercial requirement.
I think Keith makes some interesting points about the military there, and I think looking back at history, it's interesting that during wars, during First World War, Second World War, that's where so many advances were made in aviation, and in fact in drones as well. They've existed as far back as the First World War. Similarly, medicinal applications during wartime. And it's my feeling that it's actually going to be the military who develop these RPAS, and I think these RPAS could get bigger and bigger, and it will take some time, I think, before eventually we might think, actually this RPAS does work, because at the moment the level of safety is not great, a bit of an unfair comparison because they often operate in hostile territory.
Yeah.
But we will look back and say, well, those RPAS seem to be working now. Perhaps they may be safe enough to use in a civil context.
But if we've got a young Bill Gates or a young Steve Jobs working in a garage at the moment, he might prove us all wrong.
He might.
I'd like to take the point that was made there, actually. The military side is quite right. There is not a European mail programme. There's lots of talk of a European mail programme, and there's lots of talk that tends to compete with itself about being certain that it's got the next European mail programme understood. However, there are large mail systems within the militaries of Europe. At the moment, they fly under mainly as they come back from certainly Afghanistan and the UK's point of view. What are we going to do with them? And there is a hope to be able to fly them in civil airspace. And so there is some systems development to be able to use some of the systems we have, even though we're not building a new platform. So those developments certainly, you can see that moving from danger area to danger area covers across the civil airspace. They need to start to look at how do we do that without special exemptions and state aircraft exemptions to do that. And there is a willingness to work on those areas. So we are looking at the technologies, even if we're not building a specific platform. I agree with you, Andy. Keith?
Yes. My final point on that is that the regulatory issue is still nonetheless important, even if we're not building platforms. If anybody in Europe, a European-based entrepreneur or innovator, wishes to use the technology, it clearly has to be an appropriate and positive regulatory framework within which that entrepreneur is able to exploit the technology. It may well be that the platform will be a European, or perhaps almost inevitably at the smaller end, an Israeli platform. The crux of it will be putting the systems on and then using it to generate value.
I've just been handed an acronym, MAIL.
Sorry, medium altitude long endurance.
Well done. 100% correct,
You
yes.
probably get hail as well, which is high altitude.
I see, right, okay. Mail IL, yes. Okay, we really must, we have well overstepped our time. I'm afraid the witnesses must be pretty tired of all of this. But the final question, and one of the most significant questions, I think, is from Lord Wilson.
Yes, let me do it quite briefly. We've touched on the question of privacy and how privacy can be invaded by RPAS. We haven't so much touched on the question of physical threat, i.e. putting a payload, an explosive payload or something on. Could you help us by, in a very practical way, suggesting how these issues might be dealt with? Could there, for instance, be some way of registering every RPAS so that you could identify who was infringing privacy, and if something went wrong, who had put an explosive device on? What I'm seeking for, and I think these are small RPAS, not mails, just sort of practical suggestions of how this might be tackled.
I think, if I take your question very simply first off, if I take an automobile, how do I understand if somebody's going to use it and pack it full of explosives? The RPAS is not the issue, it's tracking the person with the intent is the issue. It's not the means. same thing has come up in the European Commission DG Enterprise meeting I was at the other week, where they were looking at regulating for the privacy side RPAS separately. And there was a group of us from Holland, France, myself, and luckily from the Information Commissioner's Office in the UK, who were actually saying that this, the RPAS is just a means of collection data, and it's no different from any other means of collecting data, and therefore the existing rules for collecting data and how you deal with it should be extant, and they are there and enough. So take your point about explosives, the rules on how do I deliver explosives are exactly the same as how do I deliver explosives. No, you can't track with legislation somebody who decides to use something like this in that manner, simply because they're not going to become on the radar and sign up and become licensed to go do that operation. By definition.
Do you mind if I put it slightly differently? I mean, of course, an explosive which has exploded is rather, by the time it's exploded, it's done the damage. But if it's a question of privacy, it could be trying to identify who has done it, and even with an explosive, who did it. Is it possible at all, you think, with any way of identifying?
If you collected data as of a CCTV camera, there are certain rules that govern how you manage that. So collecting that data on who's doing what, or surveillance with a RPAS, no matter what size, small or large, is governed by the same rules, and what you have a legal responsibility whether
at the moment.
At the moment.
If you buy, with all due respect, if you walk into Maplins and bought yourself a small RPAS and put a lump of explosive under it, there's no way you can trace back unless you're requiring a license to buy an RPAS from Maplins. You're getting into the realms here of gun control and the issues the United States will have over that kind of prohibition.
We're very concerned, not just for privacy reasons, but also these small RPAS that you can buy in Maplins getting into the hands of somebody who doesn't appreciate how dangerous it might be to go and fly over the approach to Heathrow. I know it'd be a bit of an administrative nightmare, but if you buy a TV nowadays, and I haven't bought one for quite a while, you have to give your address to the TV licensing authority.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And, I would say at least we should be able to do something like that in order to trace it. And yes, you've got a question about privacy, but it's the danger of these small RPASs bumping into an airliner that really concerns me. In terms of where they might preventing them from being flown somewhere, we do have this technique called geofencing, where even some of the smallest and cheapest ones, the Phantom that's made by DJI in China, they can put in all the controlled airspace where all the airports are. In fact, their latest one that is coming off the shelves, they put in all the controlled airspace where all the aircraft are. So if it is flying towards that controlled airspace, it will bump into it and it'll fly down a cone and then land on the ground. If you happen to be in controlled airspace, as I understand, it won't even take off. So that's a fantastic safety thing that we wish to promote. And I have heard that the geofencing in this particular model, it costs about £500 or £600. You can't fly it in Tiananmen Square. So you can put in whatever you like, and it doesn't cost a lot of money to do that.
I think there's a really interesting point, the TV license and idea. I did actually, in the last 20 minutes of the last session, hear the sort of same question and a similar type of approach. As the trade association, it's interesting, I agree with the licensing side, but you've got to be careful not to stifle the entrepreneurs. At the same time, as the trade association, I got a telephone call only about 4 or 5 weeks ago from a gentleman up north, I won't mention his name, who rang me up as the trade association and said, do I need to do something? I said, why? He said, because I've been flying small systems taking photographs for the last 2 years, and I didn't know I needed anything till somebody said to him, are you licensed? And he said, what? And so they pointed to us, and we pointed him towards all the people who do the training, etc. But yeah, he bought it, he put a camera, he took a picture of a friend's house and framed it for them, and somebody said, can you do that for me? And he ended up with a small business not knowing anything else. So there is education there, and I think at the point of sale is part of where that education could start. I'm as bad as everybody else. I don't read all the paperwork that comes with everything I buy.
That's right.
But at least you put it there.
Well, any more questions? First of all, any questions from our witnesses? Any more questions from the members? Yes.
Mr. Brown, you mentioned Japan, and you said Japan is extremely active in this field. So my question is, maybe a written answer is easier, is just how active is Japan, and what sort of rules and regulations do they have? Because I'm not sure that we have a handful on that at the moment.
I think that was in the... we got sent from the European Commission that said they'd been so successful.
But I'm not sure if we know what their regulations are.
I don't know. I don't know. All I want to point out is regulations are good.
Right, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Well, can I say thank you?
I would say that Japan were very early in this, and they used them a lot for monitoring of agriculture, certainly in the early days. If that expansion is associated with that, I don't know, but certainly in the early days they were very heavily into it.
It's the agriculture that's the big thing there.
Thank you.
Well, can I say a very big thank you for your patience and for putting up with us in our division, etc., and also for giving such great answers. You will be, I did say that you will get copies of the transcript anyway, and hopefully when we produce the report, you will approve. You might not agree with everything else, because we don't still know what our conclusion is going to be. But it's been a very worthwhile session, and similarly, the people still at the back, I mean, they've been grilled and then still come back for more. So we're very honoured that you've given us the time. Thank you.